History isn't always this slow, steady march forward. Sometimes it's more like a sudden jolt, a massive reaction, right? It's when a society looks at itself, sees a crisis, and reacts with so much force. It's like this dramatic correction. And that's exactly what we're talking about today, the Progressive Era. And honestly, one of the best ways to get your head around this whole period is with this one amazing metaphor, like a fever breaking. I mean, think about it. It just perfectly captures the sense that society itself was sick, really sick. And the progressive movement, that was the body's desperate, intense, all-out response to try and heal itself. It was the fever breaking. All right, so if we're gonna stick with that sickness metaphor, to really get the cure, you've got to understand the disease, right? The progressives didn't just pop up out of nowhere. No, they were a direct reaction to the huge systemic problems of the time right before them, what we called the Gilded Age. And believe me, the symptoms were everywhere. You had these gigantic monopolies, they called them trusts, that had a stranglehold on, well, everything. The economy, politics, you name it. Corruption was just baked into the system. Think of political machines like Tammany Hall running entire cities. The gap between the super rich and the dirt poor wasn't a gap, it was a canyon. Meanwhile, millions of people were stuck in dangerous factories for pennies, living in these crowded, filthy city slums. And on top of all that, the economy kept crashing. So yeah, for a lot of people, it really felt like the whole idea of democracy was just falling apart. So, who were the doctors in this scenario? Who were the ones trying to cure this sick society? This is where it gets really interesting, because Progressive wasn't some neat and tidy political party. Not at all. It was this huge, messy, sprawling coalition of all kinds of reformers who didn't always see eye to eye. I mean, just look at the sheer diversity here. This was absolutely not one single group. It was what you'd call a big tent, for sure. You had Protestant moral reformers pushing for things like prohibition, working right alongside labor leaders who were fighting for better pay. You had suffragists demanding the vote for women, African American activists fighting for their basic civil rights, and this whole new class of educated city dwellers, doctors, lawyers, professors, all pushing for change from their own angle. Did they agree on everything? No way. But what they all shared was this powerful sense of urgency. Something had to be done. So you gotta ask, what on earth could hold a group like that together? Well, it all boiled down to one single, kind of revolutionary idea. They looked at the problems of the Gilded Age, the giant corporations, the insane inequality, the corruption, and they said, you know what, this is too big. This is way too big for individuals or charities to fix. And this is the key. They started seeing government not as this thing you had to put up with, but as the one tool powerful enough to actually step in and fix things, to restore some kind of balance. Okay, so armed with this new belief in what government could do, they came up with a treatment plan. And they rolled out some incredibly powerful new tools and strategies, all designed to shine a light on the problems and force some real change. And maybe their most powerful weapon was a brand new kind of investigative journalism. The president at the time, Teddy Roosevelt, actually gave them their famous nickname, the Muckrakers. And these folks weren't just writing opinion pieces. No, their whole thing was digging up cold, hard, documented facts to expose the rot hiding in business and politics. The goal was pretty simple: shock the public with the truth so they'd have no choice but to demand reform. And this is maybe the perfect case study of how this worked. So in 1906, a guy named Upton Sinclair writes this book, The Jungle. Now, funnily enough, his goal was to expose how badly the workers were treated, but what really got people's attention, what really horrified them, were the absolutely disgusting details he included about what was going into their meat. I mean, it was stomach-turning. The public outrage was so huge, so immediate, that President Roosevelt himself was pressured to act. And get this, in the very same year the book came out, Congress passed the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act. That's a straight line from a book to a federal law. And Sinclair was far from the only one. You had Ida Tarbell, whose meticulous reporting on the Standard Oil monopoly basically gave the government the ammunition it needed to break the company up. Then there was Jacob Riis, who used this newfangled thing called photography in his book, How the Other Half Lives. For the first time, wealthy people could see with their own eyes the horrible conditions in the slums. It was undeniable, and it spurred housing reform. And this wasn't just happening in English. You had journalists like Ang Punu, who ran a Chinese-language newspaper, using the exact same muckraking tactics to fight discriminatory laws and stand up for immigrant rights. So, okay, exposing all the problems, that's step one. But the progressives quickly realized the next logical step. If the whole political system is broken and corrupt, well, then you have to change the rules of the game itself.
And that's exactly what they did. They pushed for a whole wave of reforms meant to go around the corrupt political bosses and put power back in the hands of the voters. Things like the secret ballot, which seems obvious to us, but it was huge because it made it harder for people to be threatened or bribed for their vote. They introduced these really radical tools like the initiative, referendum, and recall, which basically let citizens propose laws, vote down laws, and even fire elected officials. And this all led up to the 17th Amendment on the national level, which took the power of picking U.S. senators away from shady state legislatures and gave it directly to the people.
Okay, but here's where the story gets a lot more complicated. Because for all their huge successes, this movement was full of deep conflicts and, frankly, major contradictions. That treatment they were giving society, it sometimes had some really unexpected and not always good side effects. Right at the very core of progressivism was this massive tug of war over how to actually govern. On one side, you had the direct democracy folks. They trusted the wisdom of the average person and wanted to give them more tools, more control. But then you had this other really powerful group that argued for expert control. Their thinking was, hey, modern society is super complex. We can't leave it to amateurs. They wanted to put trained professional experts, like city managers who weren't politicians, in charge of running the government efficiently based on data and science, even if that meant the voters had less direct say. And you can see that exact same tension, the people versus the experts, play out in the big environmental debate of the day. On one side, you had the preservationists, like John Muir. For him, nature was spiritual, sacred. It needed to be protected from any and all human development. Keep it wild. But on the other side were the conservationists, led by guys like Gifford Pinchot. They had a much more technical view. For them, nature was a resource to be managed by experts for wise use. The goal wasn't to leave it alone, but to manage it scientifically for long-term human benefit. It was that expert-led efficiency mindset applied to the entire natural world. But we have to talk about the movement's biggest contradiction, its most glaring, undeniable failure. And that was on the issue of racial justice. While these reformers were fighting for a more fair and democratic society in so many ways, the mainstream progressive movement pretty much failed to challenge the horrifying system of Jim Crow segregation. In fact, in some cases, they actively supported it. And that massive blind spot makes the work of the people who were fighting for racial justice even more important, because there was a kind of parallel progressive movement happening at the same time. You had incredible figures like W.E.B. Du Bois, who demanded immediate civil rights and helped found the NAACP. You had educators like Nannie Helen Burroughs, who was dedicated to empowering Black women, and activists like Carlos Montezuma, fighting for the rights and citizenship of Native Americans. They were pushing for a version of progress that was truly for everyone. So yeah, the movement had serious flaws, but you just can't overstate the sheer scale of change that happened in such a short time. I mean, just look at this. In only 7 years, the country added 4 amendments to the Constitution. Think about how wild that is. In less than a decade, they created the federal income tax, changed how we elect senators, banned all alcohol, and finally gave women the right to vote. It was a whirlwind. So let's bring it all home. What's the final prognosis on the progressive era? Well, the truth is its legacy is everywhere. And the central debate it kicked off, it might be more relevant today than ever before. Seriously, we are basically living inside the house that the progressives built. The fact that we have a federal income tax, that's them. The fact that you vote for your senators directly, them too. Women having the right to vote. The FDA making sure our food and drugs are safe, laws to break up monopolies, our entire national park and forest system, all of it. That is a direct inheritance from this period. But, you know, their biggest legacy might actually be the question they left behind. That core dilemma we talked about, that tension between the will of the people and the advice of the experts, that is the exact same tension at the heart of our biggest challenges today. I mean, think about it. How do we tackle climate change? How do we regulate AI? How do we deal with economic inequality? It's the same fundamental debate. And so that leaves us with the exact same question they wrestled with 100 years ago. When we're facing huge, complex problems, where do we put our ultimate trust? In the people or in the experts? The progressives never really answered that. They just set up the debate. And it's a debate we are all still very much a part of today.